very interesting what happened with the Proud Boys. We wanted to make sure that we got into the verdict that came down, which genuinely is historic, as we had laid out here previously, both on the Oath Keepers and on the Proud Boys, who were charged with seditious conspiracy. Seditious conspiracy is a very, very difficult charge to prove. The last time that the FBI had brought that case it's like a domestic terrorism incident in the 2000s, they actually lost quite handily. So Crystal and I were very skeptical that the jury was going to be able to find these claims credible. Ultimately, though, the FBI and the DOJ, the Biden Justice Department, prevailed in this case. I think it's worth spending a little bit of time on what happened there. So let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. This is the release from the Department of Justice. They say the jury in the District of Columbia returned guilty verdicts, multiple felonies against 5 members of the Proud Boys, finding 4 of the defendants guilty of seditious conspiracy for their actions before and during the breach of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Here was the case, basically, that the DOJ laid out. The defendants plotted to oppose by force the lawful transfer of presidential power, to prevent members of Congress and the federal law enforcement officers to help protect them from discharging their duties. One of them, Enrico Tarrio, or of Miami, the former chairman of the Proud Boys, they list the rest of the defendants, were guilty then of seditious conspiracy and the conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. Now, I think it's interesting, Ryan, and I know that you have some background on this, about the way that the seditious conspiracy charge was proven. A lot of it rests on text messages that were actually sent by Tarrio to the rest of the Proud Boys about what they were entering in. Now, around the jury and the way that they arrived at this, there was actually a fascinating interview with the jury members in Vice. And one of them flagged to me. Now, I'm not questioning the jury. I'm literally just using their own words about how they ended up at this charge. Just put this up there on the screen. They say, what evidence convinced you that the Proud Boys had entered into conspicuous and seditious conspiracy? Here is exactly what they said verbatim. It was all the chatter, all the chats, Parler, Telegram, not just the chats, but also the private text. I think what it boiled down to, what they had to say prior to Jan 6, and the fact that they had wanted to do something in secret. And that's why the government couldn't present too much evidence that they had already deleted, because it was unrecoverable. So they didn't definitely want people to know. They didn't want everybody to know the plan, the Proud Boys, because then I guess it would have gotten out, and they didn't want it to get out. What did you make of this, Ryan? A lot of people who are civil libertarians have picked up on this to say, well, you're basically saying that the absence of evidence is the evidence of absence. Donald Rumsfeld quote, see what I'm going for there, and convicted them on seditious conspiracy based on this, that they were trying to cover it up. Obviously, it doesn't make it look good, but it also isn't necessarily the direct evidence, at least in the way that many civil libertarians are looking at it, for why that should have been charged. Once again, the jury can do what it likes, and it didn't reach its decision. We're just here talking about it.
It's a deeply, deeply disturbing rationale to say that, well, if you were trying to maintain your privacy, that there must be some reason. Like that is
that's why I was worried about it.
That's so antithetical to American values. But I think what you also saw later in that interview is this clash of 2 American values. One was the sanctity of free elections and the peaceful transfer of power. And she says in that interview, we wanted to send a message that this is not okay, that if you do this, you'll be punished, so that nobody in the future ever does that. And they were willing to bend that fundamental kind of bedrock American principle that the government has to present evidence. You know,
beyond a reasonable doubt.
Beyond a reasonable doubt. And that juries in the past have been proud to say, we're conflicted about this not guilty verdict, but it is the responsibility of us as citizens to force the government to bring forward evidence. Even if we feel like in our guts the person is guilty, they didn't make the case, and so therefore we're going to rule this person not guilty, because that's how our American system of criminal justice works. And here they kind of, according to her, are kind of discarding that and saying, well, they probably did it, and the fact that they deleted all these messages suggests to us very strongly that they did it, and it's more important for us to err on the side of punishing them so that nobody tries to bust
Right.
up an election again.
And I don't want people to accuse us of cherry picking this interview. She literally said this. They said, did it matter that there were significant amounts of messages deleted? Quote, it showed an absence of evidence of standing down. No one says, no, don't do this. We're not going to do this. There was none of that. And that was probably because they never said it. The things that were affirming they were going to be violent, they just kind of let it happen. They point to one of the defendants was actually acquitted on seditious conspiracy, and they ask for the difference. And they say, well, he wasn't in leadership, and he only joined the Proud Boys in November or December of 2020, so he didn't have a whole lot of time pre-January 6th. They have different tiers that they were talking about. We actually deadlocked on one of the defendants at first, got through that and said not guilty. Another factor was that he wasn't the brightest bulb on the porch and may not have been bright enough to really know about the plan. So I said, well, poor guy, he should have listened to his father-in-law who told him don't go. Pretty much everybody should listen to their father-in-law or anybody else that told them not to go, because now these guys are facing some serious jail time. And let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. The Associated Press actually did a decent explainer here. And again, I want to just reiterate, why are we spending time on the seditious conspiracy charge? This is one of the rarest charges and very, very tough ones for governments to be able to prove. I mean, historically, most juries have rejected it in the past when the U.S. government brought this, even in cases of major domestic terrorism. So just keep that in mind. And the reason why is it was intended for basically extremists and others like in the post-Civil War era. I mean, you can imagine the context of what happened. What they Associated Press and all of that point out is that this post-Civil War law was to arrest Southerners who were still fighting the U.S. government. Very rare in modern American history. What they basically said is that they had to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that this was a conspiracy not just to storm the Capitol, but explicitly to block the transfer of power from Trump to Biden. Now, as I've pointed out here previously, outside of the recent January 6 cases, the previous ones that were brought in government all came to acquittals. That was in 2012 against that so-called like hate group, because they said that prosecutors relied at that time specifically only on hateful diatribes against the First Amendment and didn't actually prove, as required by the law, that they ever had detailed plans for rebellions. And so the reason why we're spending time on the detailed plans is that the detailed plans and their government's ability to prove those detailed plans are at the heart of a successful seditious conspiracy charge under the statute in the U.S. federal law.
Yeah, and so often when you're debating the questions of these political crimes, there is a crime that underlies it where you don't even need this extra political crime in there. So in other words, like, did a bunch of these guys, not Torrio, because he was already under arrest, but did
maybe
maybe a Fed.
Yeah, not maybe. It genuinely was a federal informant, which is kind of wild because he still got convicted anyway.
Right. What's the point of having all these federal informants if you can't stop this?
What's the point of being a Fed if the Feds are still going to charge you?
There's also that.
Yeah.
So these guys did sack the Capitol, and they did do so with the intent of blocking this transfer of power, like blocking this proceeding. So you've got them on that.
Yeah.
Like charge them.
Conspiracy to obstruct.
Charge them with that and lock them up for that.
Right.
Like great.
Right.
If you're going to then pile on the extra political charges, I feel like you really do need to have the evidence to back that up. And if they deleted it before you could get it, then that's too bad for the prosecutors. It's so often the case that you already have like the law in place that you need, but it's that people just want more. And so like, I forget where I was reading this, but after John Brown raided Harper's Ferry,
yes, that's
it
right.
was Stephen Douglas, the Democratic senator of the Lincoln-Douglas debates, who said, we need tougher laws. So you don't need tougher laws.
Yeah.
He killed people. Like, you've got him.
Yeah.
Like he led an insurrection. Now, to me, good for him, and he's a hero.
Well, the reason Stephen Douglas and all of them did that is because Brown became a political symbol of rebellion across the world. He like ignited the flame and all of that, and not only across the world, but obviously in the North. Prior to that, the idea of armed rebellion over slavery was basically unthinkable. And it also spawned. It was like it's kind of like people who pray for disaster. The Southerners, they're called fire eaters at the time, people who wanted to break away from the Union. They were like, Brown was everything they could have imagined in their wildest dreams about what the North really wanted to do to them.
Yeah, and even Lincoln was like, look, we hanged the guy.
Yeah.
He has some court where he said, we could hang him 10 times.
Right.
And they wouldn't be satisfied. So Douglas is like, well, how about more laws?
Yeah.
And it's the exact same political system. Like, that's what would happen today. You'd have people just proposing new laws because hanging him once, isn't enough to satisfy the cable news pundits of the time.
The reason why this is an important point is you can't fix what happened on January 6th in the law. It's not a law question. It's a political question. It's a question of political legitimacy of Biden, of Trump questioning the democratic process, of the democratic will of the people and who they elect, and whether Republicans still choose him as a leader even post that. These are all cultural, political questions that can only be resolved through the democratic process. You cannot legal your way out of John Brown, of January. But I'm not comparing the two. They are not in any way similar. But what I'm saying is just that these big, events like this are not matters of we need new laws to make sure this doesn't happen. By the way, they did have new laws through the Dred Scott decision and all of that, or and all of the eventual political compromises that were made through law to try and prevent the Civil War, and it didn't work because it was not a question of law. It was a question of human dignity, of power, of slavery, and all of that that eventually resulted in a clash of wills and of arms that had to be, where one side had to be subjugated. I hope we don't come to that. I pray that we don't. But the point is that we can only solve this through means way above the law, at least just in my opinion.
Right, and it's not as if John Brown, if Stephen Douglas had written the Seditious Act before that, would be like, well, then I'm not going to go for Harper's Ferry.
That's the thing too about Brown. Brown actually rejected all of the compromises that I'm talking about. He thought that they were wimps and that they weren't.
If you're against slavery, there's no.
I mean, it's kind of like that Louis C.K. joke. He's like, yeah, the abortion protesters, they think there's murder going on in there. He's like, what would you do if you? And I was like, I think that actually coded for liberals the way that many pro-life people who I've met as well, the way they think about this is it's always just important to get in the mind of somebody that you don't understand. As to why this matters now, seditious conspiracy versus just the obstructing a government proceeding that a lot of the other Jan 6ers have been convicted on. Let's put this up there on the screen. The leader of the Oath Keepers is now facing possibly 25 years in federal prison. Stuart Rhodes was convicted already of seditious conspiracy, where they were, I think, more easily able to prove the detailed plot, although even there, again, it all comes back to whether it was a genuine plot to actually stop the transfer of power versus a riot, which is basically what the defense said there at trial. They painted him as a terrorist. Now they are saying, quote, that a harsh sentence is critical to deter political violence, and they said that what Rhodes believes has done they wrote that Rhodes believes he has done nothing wrong and still presents a threat to American democracy and to American lives should he not receive the 25-year sentence. So that's why, again, it's important, is because, seditious conspiracy, theoretically, you could spend your life in prison after being convicted of this charge.
Right, and in the old days, you'd be hanged.
You would, yeah.
Right. You come for the king.
There was some justice for that.
You come for the king and you miss.
Yes.
So, a lot of me has not a lot of sympathy because of that rationale, that everybody knows that if you come for the king and you miss, or what you best not miss, and they missed.
Yes.
So, they effed around, and this is the finding out period.
Usually it's just me quoting Omar from The Wire here.
Right.
So it's good to have another Wire guy here.
There you go.
Yeah.
And so, but these extremely long sentences, I think we don't realize how kind of out of the kind of civilized world we've gotten. Up until the early part of the 20th century, it was extremely rare for people to get even 10-year sentences.
That's true.
Now, some of that was because you were much more likely to get capital punishment for murder, and then everything else underneath that, there were shorter sentences. You probably know this. When Stalin moved from kind of typical 10-year, they call them tenors, 10-year sentences to 25-year sentences, the entire globe was shocked. Like, you're giving 25-year sentences out? Like, this is barbaric.
Right, that was during the purges in the 1930s.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this is not that long ago that the entire world considered 25-year sentences to be completely barbaric.
Life expectancy was lower, I guess.
That's true. So those were life sentences,
Yeah.
especially in Russia at the time. But now they're dropping 25-year sentences all over the place. So, and a lot of people did a lot less than him, serving more time.
Yeah, that actually very true. Anyway, so keep that in mind as we're thinking about this. There's always, what we always try to do here is bring, this isn't, there's no defense of the Proud Boys. I'd be saying the same thing or whatever if it was some Like what's a good example is the Weathermen. The Weathermen bombers.
Right, they don't need 25 years.
You guys want to know why the Weathermen didn't ever serve, even though they literally bombed the Capitol? I think people forget that. You know why? Because the FBI was illegally spying on them, and we easily could have convicted every single one of them for life, even for murder. In some cases, some of them were convicted, but they weren't because J. Edgar Hoover and others violated their civil liberties, and the determination was made because their civil liberties were violated. Even though these people genuinely did commit acts of domestic terrorism and wanted a violent insurrection against the U.S. government, that still the principle had to hold within U.S. law that civil liberties and violations by the state shall not trump the ability to go after them.
Same with Ellsberg. They would have gotten him.
Right.
The only reason he got off.
The only reason he got off is because the Nixon administration spied on him. Yeah, which is incredible. So always keep that in mind whenever we're thinking about these things.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.